여기가 이렇게 연결이 되네요.
불가거리면 계속 엇갈리는데 여기서 좀 기다리지 그랬어요.
첫 번째는 펜으로만 그릴 거, 지울 수 없게. 그리고 틀려도 그대로 둘 거.
그러니까 모두 다 그럴 수 있다고요?
네. 그럴 수 있죠. 그리고 영화잖아요, 그건.
여긴 것 같은데?
이 금방도 다 밀릴 거야?
아, 변하네.
50명이나 있었는데.
Hi everyone! So welcome to Carolyn Talks. This is my podcast / YouTube channel where I, your host Carolyn Heiss, speak to film creators about their work, the industry, and what inspires them. And today I'm joined again by director Kim Taeyang to talk about his film Mimang, but also about filming in Seoul, because we previously spoke to each other during TIFF where the film screened, and I had an amazing time talking to you about the film and also talking to your cast, but today's just you, so thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me again today.
감사합니다.
Kamsahamnida. So one of the first things I want to talk to you about is we didn't really get a chance to talk about it before, but I'm always curious about how filmmakers begin their start. So for you, how did you get into filmmaking?
첫 질문은 이제 한국에서 특히 본인이 어떻게 영화 만들기 시작했는지 좀 설명해주면.
처음에 원래 10대 시절에는 그림을 그리고 싶었었는데 그 동네에 갑자기 영화관이 하나가 생기게 돼가지고 그때 영화를 봤는데 그 영화 속 안에서 영화 촬영 장면이 나오게 된 거예요. 그래서 그림을 그리는 거랑 영화를 찍는 거랑 되게 비슷하다라는 느낌을 받아서 그림보다 영화를 한번 찍어보는 게 어떨까라는 생각을 처음으로 하게 됐어요.
So he said in his teens, when he was younger, he actually wanted to be an artist, a painter or a drawer, and that's kind of on the track that he was on. But a theater was built in his neighborhood. He's not from Seoul, right? He's from like the boonies. About as boonies as you can get.
Which is it? It would be called, there are provinces here, right? Which province?
어떤 도이지? 그 고향 전라도.
Jeollado. Oh,
전라도 지리마운틴.
Jiri Mountain.
Yeah, I know Jeollado. I actually had a friend who used to live there and teach there, so I'm always fascinated with like some accents that I can pick up, because I find to me Jeollado accents kind of have almost like a Japanese inflection in how they speak. So it's always fascinating to me. So yes, I get to meet someone from Jeollado. Say Christine, I finally got to meet someone. But so when you in Jeollado, like you wanted to do art. What kind of art?
그 그림 그리고 싶다고 했는데 어떤 그림 그리고 싶었어요? Painting. So he wanted to be a painter, but a theater was built in his neighborhood, and he went in the theater, and he saw like them filming something in that theater, and he realized that like, oh, this could be a form of painting, painting with different tools. That's what he said.
Yeah.
That's why I started.
That's why you start. Yeah, film is a way of painting stories. You're telling a story from a blank canvas, from nothing, and just adding color and stories to it. So you saw them filming in the theater. What were your steps after that?
그 이후에 어떤 액션 했는지 이제 그거 보고 나는 해야 되겠다. 어떻게 이제 조금 더 현실적으로 실질적으로 어떻게 감독이 되어갔는지.
한국에서 이제 시골에서 영화를 공부하기라는 건 너무 어려웠기 때문에 대학교 메이저를 영화를 선택해서 입학을 했고 그 대학교의 교수님이 홍상수 감독님이셔서 그에게서 이제 영화를 배우기 시작했고 졸업 후에는 상업 영화랑 독립 영화를 오가면서 영화 스태프 조감독으로 일했었어. 그렇게 해서 영화를 배우면서 내 영화를 준비했고 그렇게 찍은 영화가 미망이 된 거지.
So, you know, studying film in the countryside in Jeollado is hard. So he decided to major in film and come to Seoul, right? He studied in Seoul. So that's when he left his hometown and came to study film. He was actually the student of Hong Sang-soo.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Ah.
Maybe you can tell in the film. There's something there. We hear it a lot.
Hong Sang-soo's his film. I think the last film I saw, I can't remember the name, but it was a black and white film, I believe.
Black and white, maybe.
It was a black and white film. But his stories are very minimalist in a way of how he tells the story and kind of and it feels almost, instead of scripted, it just feels like he's following his characters, and I do kind of get that sense in Mimang, where you're just basically an observer. You know, the camera and the audience are just an observer in these people's lives. So do you think what is it about that particular style of filmmaking, especially in Mimang, where you're just an observer? You're just like, these people are just having these conversations and I'm just walking around them. Like what about that style of filmmaking attracts you as a filmmaker?
So just to head off, like his journey about being a filmmaker, before I translate what you just asked.
Sorry about that. Sorry.
So he studied under Hong Sang-soo, and after graduating, he worked on commercial films and art films as the staff with Hong Sang-soo, you know, with the crew that he has. So 그러면 이제 홍상수한테 배웠다는 거 이제 알게 되고, 그러면 약간 겹치는 부분은 약간 관찰하는 어떤 스타일로 영화 만든다는 느낌 저기가 들었는데, 그러면 자기한테 그렇게 느꼈는지, 이렇게 좀 관찰하면서 이 조명이라든지 어떤 상황, 이제 관찰하는 입장인지 너의 어떤 스타일 좀 설명해 줬으면
아마
연결될 것 같아요.
홍상수 감독님한테 배웠던 건, 그리고 그게 적용됐던 거는 영화를 대하는 태도 혹은 영화를 이야기를 쓰는 어떤 자세, 그러니까 에티튜드에 대해서 배웠던 게 많았고, 그런 것들은 계속해서 의식하고 있었지만 영화를 찍는 것 자체는 오히려 홍 감독님보다는 다양한 영화들에 대해서 많이 영향을 받았다고 생각을 해. 뭐 영화의 구조 같은 경우는 미국의 타란티노 영화에서 많이 영감을 받았고, 그다음에 뭐 기획 자체에서는 리처드 링클레이터 영화도 있고, 그러니까 흔히들 이렇게 레퍼런스 뽑으라면 그런 영화들이 있는데 꼭 홍 감독님한테서만 영화를 배웠기 때문에 그의 어떤 영화적인 시선을 제가 닮아갔던 건 아니었던 것 같다라는 얘기를 하고.
좋아. 그러면 그래도 질문은 뭐 꼭 홍상수 아니어도 그냥 본인이 봤을 때 약간 관찰한다는 느낌? 그런 것 뭐 어떤 본인한테 있는지 약간 그 질문, 그러니까 홍상수의 어떤 역량보다 뭐 그런 것 자기가 그냥 즉시 생각하면서 뭐 관찰하는 어떤 느낌 자기가 들었는데
확실히 관찰하는 느낌으로 영화를 다가가고자 했어요. 왜냐면 근데 영화에서 보면은 되게 멀리서 관조적으로 바라보게 되는데 나중에 점진적으로 카메라가 인물들에게 가까워지면서 관찰의 시점에서 점점 이제 인물하고 가까워지게 되는 그렇게 영화를 설계를 했죠, 일부러. 계속 관찰하기만 하지 않고 카메라가 다가가면서 인물과 친밀해지는 느낌으로.
Great.
Yeah.
So first to go on the theme of observation in his film. So it definitely, you know, his intention was to kind of start from quite far away. So in the first of the 3 episodes, you know, you're getting shots from like across the street and like way back, but like throughout, you know, as the film progresses, it's slowly going in and in to kind of give more intimacy. So from observer to intimacy, you know, we get to know these people over the course of the film. But he also wanted to say that what he really learned from Hong Sang-soo, being, you know, one of his students, was more like the attitude and an approach to filmmaking in general. So how to work with people, how to make your team, all of these things, rather than, you know, the aesthetics or the themes that he's dealing with. And he just wanted to say that like some of the other influences that he had, like from Tarantino to Linklater, from different aspects of filmmaking, he looked at a lot more filmmakers in finding his influences as a filmmaker.
And what do you think was the most important lesson you learned from Hong Sang-soo with regards to actually not the craft of being a filmmaker, but also I guess being almost like a manager? Because the thing for filmmakers as a director, you are a manager of a film set. You are a manager of your cast, the cinematography, the editors, like you manage everything. What was the most important aspect of that you learned from him that you think will always stay with you as a filmmaker?
그 태도적인 부분, 그 홍상수한테 그러니까 영화 만드는 거 어떤 스타일 이런 거 떠나서 그냥 태도, 자기가 관리하는, 운영하는 감독으로서.
To be honest, 솔직할 거.
He's gonna be honest.
And then
to be honest. To be honest.
to be honest.
Honesty.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was in like.
important.
네.
그리고 어떤 일이 벌어질지 계속 관찰하고 생각할 것. 왜냐면 갑자기 비가 내리게 될 수도 있고 상황은 계속 바뀔 수 있는 건데 내가 원하는 어떤 비전을 구현하는 것도 굉장히 중요하지만 환경에서 어떤 일이 벌어지는 거를 받아들이는 자세도 되게 중요하다. 솔직할 것과 그 두 가지가 가장 큰 그 배움의 가르침이었다고 생각해요.
So there are two. The first one, as you mentioned, is honesty. To be honest, if you can. The second one is to watch what happens as it arises. So the filmmaker's vision is very important, but at the same time, you never know when it's going to rain. You never know when something's going to happen. When a cloud is going to get in your shot. You never know what's going to happen. So being able to kind of roll with these environmental random changes as they come. Those are the two main things.
The adaptability. But I think being honest is, I think, very important because as a filmmaker, when your performers aren't giving you what you want from them, you have to be honest to be able to critique them. And be able to say, you're not giving me what I want for this scene as a character. And you have to be able to be honest because then it's a disservice to you, a disservice to the story, but also a disservice to the actors. Because then you're not, you're letting them know, okay, like you could be better, but I know you're not giving me the best you can. And how do you, in that sense of honesty, how do you work around being kind in your delivery of not just to the performers, but also like say for instance to the editors and the cinematographers and all of the like dozens and hundreds of people you have on the set? How are you able to like make sure you're honest, but then also still be kind about it? Because I think that's a very important thing as a filmmaker, to be able to be kind. Because if you're not kind, people aren't going to want to work with you.
Yeah. 뭐 그런 거 좀 앞부분 이해했다고 나는 그 배우들한테 어떻게 크리틱, 그러니까 솔직함 되게 중요한 건데 왜냐면 솔직해야 이제 크리틱 잘 전달할 수 있고 너가 배우들한테 원하는 거 그리고 배우 낼 수 있는 어떤 성과 좀 그 퀄리티 높일 수 있는 방법인데 그렇지만 솔직하면서도 이 친절하게 어떻게 하는지 자기가 왜냐면 뭐 배우도 있고 편집자도 있고 뭐 여러 어떤 스태프 나가지 있고 그게 어떻게 솔직하면서도 그 전달 자체는 좀 친절하게 해야 되는데 자기가 어떤 방법이나 이런 프로세스 있는지
이거는 좀 트랜스레이트하기 어려울 수도 있겠다. 그러니까 일단은 영화를 연출하거나 사람을 대할 때 기본적으로 평상시에도 연습을 한다고 생각을 해요. 그러니까 배우든 스태프든 촬영 감독이든 모든 크루들이 있을 때 제가 얘기하는 것보다 들으려고 그러니까 듣다 보면은 그 사람이 어떤 식으로 연기하고 싶은지 어떻게 촬영하고 싶은지 이런 것들을 제가 파악할 수 있잖아요. 그 다음에 들은 다음에 제 얘기를 이제 얘기하면서 조율해가는 과정을 되게 뭐라고 해야 될까? 제 고집만 세우지 않는다는 거죠.
그러니까 첫 단계는 일단 그 사람이 뭐 하고 싶은지 먼저 듣고 그 다음에 자기의 어떤 비전이나 정하고 그 다음에 어떤 조절하는 것 갖는 다음에 이제 감독, 이제 디렉팅 들어가는 거지.
그렇지. 그리고 그 사람한테 맞는 디렉팅을 하는 거예요. 그러니까 사람마다 이렇게 받아들이는 정도도 다르고 들을 수 있는 레인지가 되게 다양할 텐데 그 사람이 들을 수 있게끔 그 사람의 언어로 표현을 해주는 거지.
맞아. 딱 좋아. His way of being kind but honest at the same time and getting the performance that he wants out of all of his staff is really through conversing and interacting with them first. So usually, he'll come in as more of a listener and be like, so what do you want to, what are you going to do with this film? What are we going to do here? And kind of hear it from their angle, hear it in their language. And then he takes it back and kind of calculates, okay, so this is what they're looking for, this is what kind of person they are, and decides, what angle he's going to take as the director himself. So there's a kind of, there's a modification of his original plan there. And so, every person needs a different kind of directing style. Every actor, every editor, every blah, blah, blah needs a different kind of direction. It's like each person has their own kind of language, and figuring out how to speak to them is how he does it, how he accomplishes it.
Okay. And so because Mimang takes place over 4 years,
Yeah.
the story grows, but so do the actors, and so do you. How did your approach to telling the story and directing the cast and then working with how they've grown as actors change from the beginning to the end of the 4 years? Because we don't stay the same, human beings, we grow, we evolve, and that's a personal thing, but also professionally. Who they were as actors at the beginning wasn't who they would have been at the end of the 4 years of filming. So how did you approach your directing style throughout the 4 years of evolution and growth?
이야기했는데 그래도 한번 설명해
그래?
줄까?
그 4년 동안 이거 찍으면서 뭐 스토리도 이제 어떤 변경이 있을 거고 배우들이 어떤 성장도 있고 토론토에서 많이 물어봤잖아. 그 4년 동안 어떻게 변했나 배우로서. 근데 이제 감독님으로서 그 4년 동안 어떻게 자기의 태도 아니면 이 영화 아니면 감독으로서 어떻게 변했는지 물어보시고.
실제로 변한 건 배우들이 외모가 변했다는 거.
그치, 근데 그러니까 배우들이 그렇게 저번에 아마 물어봤는데 이제 감독으로서.
감독으로서.
감독.
나는 사실은 크게 변하지 않았던 것 같아. 왜냐면 내가 영화를 만들고 나서 변하기 시작하는 것 같아. 그래서 영화를 만드는 중이었기 때문에 성장하는 과정이 스스로 조금 더디게 천천히 이루어졌다고 생각을 하고, 그렇기 때문에 오히려 영화를 찍고 나서 내가 좀 많이 변한 것 같아. 토론토에 갔다 오고 나서. 그 전에는 사실 큰 변화를 4년 동안 나는 못 느꼈던 거지. 계속 여기에 포커스만 하고 있다고 생각하는.
In his opinion, he doesn't feel like he changed that much during the 4 years in terms of like his style or what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
So during filming, not much change, a very incremental, unnoticeable change. But after he was finished with the films, after he had finished this, he felt like looking back, he felt that he changed. After the film was released and he premiered in Toronto. Things like that.
Do you mind saying change in what way that do you think happened?
그러면 그게 어떤 변화였지? 이제 영화가 다 끝났고 이렇게 개봉됐고 그 감독으로서 어떤 그 변화 이제 제일 느꼈는지.
가장 큰 변화는 관객의 중요성에 대해서 엄청 크게 깨달았다는 점. 그 전에는 작품을 만들 때 되게 나랑 그 다음에 그 함께 만드는 스태프들, 배우들한테 초점이 맞춰져 있어서 그들은 설득하거나 그들한테 보여주면서 영화를 만들어졌다면, 지금은 이제 앞으로 나의 변화로 인해서 앞으로 하게 될 영화는 어딘가에 있을, 전 세계에 있을 관객들을 생각하면서 글을 쓰고 영화를 만들게 될 수 있을 것 같아. 그러니까 가장 크게 느낀 건 한국에서 한국적인 영화를 만들고 내가 바라보는 걸 얘기했는데, 이 영화가 다른 어떤 세계의 관객들에게도 다가갈 수 있다는 점이 가장 크게 와닿기 때문에 아마 이제 내가 글을 쓰게 되는, 이렇게 일기를 쓴다라기보다 편지를 쓴다라는 기분으로 영화를 만들게 될 것 같다.
Cool. So his biggest takeaway from having completed the film, his first feature film. I mean, he had smaller films before that, but this was, his big one, this big international premiere. So he realized, I mean, I think a lot of directors will say this, but the audiences is even more important than he found. And so it made him, before that, he would think a lot more about himself, his actors, what he wants to say, what he's trying to say about Korea, about Korean society. But from now on, he's gonna approach filmmaking from even writing a script with the thought that like, oh yeah, like someday anybody could see this, regardless of where they're living, and I need to, at some point kind of think of them and to give an image. If he used to write in his own diary, now he's gonna start writing letters.
Okay, that's an interesting way of thinking about it, because I want us to come back to the concept of honesty, but within the story, because and it kind of ties into what you were saying, because one of the things I think that's really interesting to Mimang, to me, is these characters, they're not really honest with each other. Like they kind of like lie almost subconsciously to each other, and I think it's interesting because while as this film takes place over 4 years, and as these characters, we talk about growth, they don't really seem to grow because they're still kind of like coming back to the same conversations all the time, like one of the idea of perception, and about honesty, because like using the whole statue of generally, and like no one really knowing if he was right-handed or left-handed, and how this statue was built with the scabbard being on the right-hand side, and using it, I think, as an analogy of how people perceive each other and how that perception is perpetuated for years. That's a reflection in the film, like these characters, they're perpetuating a myth of each other, like for instance, like the first scene, one of the first opening scenes, which I think is such an interesting thing, where he says, oh, he doesn't smoke. And he says that the shopkeeper wasn't at the store. And in watching the film a second time, I said, but wait, I think he lied about that. I think the shopkeeper was there, and he just said that he wasn't, so that he wouldn't have to buy the lighter. But then he goes back and he buys it, and buys the cigarettes, and then at the end of the scene, he puts it down.
Okay.
And I think that's a kind of like a metaphor for the whole film about honesty and about perception and about wanting people to see us one way where we're not. So I kind of like it ties into what you were saying about honesty as a filmmaker, where like we as people, we want people to perceive us differently to how we are, and that means we're not being honest with ourselves, and we're not being honest with the people in our lives.
Okay, I got it.
네,
혹시나 내가 한번 해볼게. 그것 좀 아무튼 솔직함, 어떤 큰 주제에 이어져서 이제 스토리로 보면, 그러니까 다시 미망으로 돌아오면 그 각 캐릭터들이 약간 100% 솔직하지는 않아. 그게 약간 뭐 서로한테도 그렇고 뭐 자기한테도 그렇게 볼 수 있고, 뭐 여러 가지 예시 이제 자기가 했는데 그 여러 가지 중에 담배 폈는데 이제 그거 담배 안 핀다고 했는데 이제 구매해서, 아니면 갔는데 뭐 어떤 그 파는 아저씨 없다고 했는데 있나 뭐 이렇게 다 의심하기 시작하는, 뭐 그게 약간 좋은 메타포로 생각한다고 했고, 그게 마침 이 이순신 신화 이제 그 미스 때 얘기할 수 있잖아. 그것처럼 이렇게 각자의 진짜 뭔지 이렇게 계속 이게 어떤 사람인지 어떤 변화인지 어떤 솔직함 이게 누군지 약간 모르면서 그 무정답의 어떤 상태에서 계속 유지되면서 사람들이 나를 어떻게 이제 바라보는지 나도 뭐 남들이 어떻게 보는지 약간 그런 큰 내용인데, 그거에 대해서 한번 얘기하자 이 정도 여는 것 같아요, 이 주제.
솔직함이라는 거는 그 영화에서 담배를 끊었다고 말했는데 피는 거는 거짓말, 그러니까 보는 사람마다 차이가 있겠지만 그거는 거짓말은 아니었던 거지. 실제로 끊었다라고 생각할 수도 있고 아닐 수도 있지만 받아들이는 사람마다 그거는 차이가 있는 거고, 나 같은 경우는 그걸 끊었다라고 실제로 생각했던 거야. 그 친구는 솔직했던 거야. 그다음에 실제로 영화 안에서는 담배 가게가 나오진 않잖아. 나중에 혼자 갔을 때만 나오지만 근데 우리가 보고 있는 건 여자였기 때문에 영화 안에서 그 남자가 방문을 했을 때 사장님이 있었는지 없었는지는 알 수 없는 거지. 그러니까 그 이순신 장군이 왼손잡인지 오른손잡인지 더 이상 우리가 알 수 없는 것처럼 그래서 모든 것들은 사실은 확실하지 않아. 기억도 그렇고 그다음에 조금 이 앞에서 우리가 함께 있었던 이 시간들도 사실 지나고 보면은 서로 다르게 기억하는 거지. 그러니까 기억의 불확정성도 얘기하는 거고 그다음에 기억의 취약성도 얘기하는 거고 그렇기 때문에 그럼에도 불구하고 솔직하다라는 거는 오해의 여지 그다음에 어떤 시간의 트위스트라고 해야 될까? 꼬임? 시간으로 인해서 우리가 기억이 왜곡됨에도 불구하고 그걸 가장 덜 왜곡시킬 수 있는 방법? 왜냐면 왜곡은 되겠지만 감정은 남아있는 거니까 추억이나 이런 것들 때문에 솔직해야지만 그 감정을 나눌 수 있다고 생각해. 상대방이 괜찮을까?
So, first of all, he started by saying that everyone, of course, is going to watch a film a little bit differently, and so for him, and he invites that. He loves. I mean, that's he definitely welcomes that. But for maybe he did quit. Maybe he didn't quit. Maybe he quit, but he just wanted to have one more. Maybe in his mind, maybe to this character, he did quit. So that's open, right? Or the store owner, maybe he was there, maybe he wasn't. We were focused on the woman at the same time, so all of those things are kind of left open, including the statue. Again, the kind of pivotal metaphor for all of these kind of things. What's true? What is certain? Nothing is certain. It's all memory anyway, right?
What is life? What is life?
What is What is life? Right, and even us, right? We all remember things differently as we watch the film too. So each watching will also bring a different memory of this scene or interpretation of that. And so, one of the major themes of the film are these constant misunderstandings plus the little twists of time that hopefully leave some kind of emotion. And that's really all that can be left, right? We're not certain of anything else.
Yeah, it's true because memory can be a very fickle and unpredictable thing. Like there's in writing there's a phrase called something narrator. It's like when you can't trust what the narrator is saying. There's a particular term for it in writing, and but it's meaning like we're only getting the perception of the story from the narrator, and we're not really getting the full side of the story. They say there's my truth, your truth, and then the real truth is, and like your film is like that. It's like all of these characters have different versions of the same memory, and they have different, especially going through time, and I thought the story of, again, using Admiral Lee is a really good metaphor for that, of where we are. I just had the word and it stood for me. And where we can't trust necessarily our own memories. And that's a very tricky thing because the human brain is so fascinating and so complicated, but we're also very simple in the fact that sometimes we don't really need to analyze everything. Sometimes some things just are. Using the statue generally, it is just the statue generally. Like, why does there need to be a debate about which side of his body the scabbard should like, but whether he's left-handed or right-handed? No one will ever really know. So why does there need to be a debate about something like this? So talk about creating a film about that, because I think it's very interesting that you created a story talking about the unreliable narrator, right? About basically our own memories being unreliable.
Unreliable.
믿을 수 없는, unreliable. 기대할 수 없고 믿을 수 없는.
I understand. Yeah.
네.
이거는 질문이 아니라 생각을 얘기해 준 겁니다.
약간 그것에 대한 어떤 너의 코멘트 좀 요청하시는 것 같은데, 그러니까 이어져서 아까 얘기했던 거지 핑퐁 하는 건데. 그러니까 기억은 약해, 맞아. 그리고 자기가 아까 얘기했던 unreliable narrator라는 어떤 그 글쓰기에서 우리가 쓰는 요소 있거든. 그게 약간 믿을 수 없는 해설자. 이 캐릭터의 어떤 모티베이션, 뭐 생각 우리는 못 믿고, 근데 보통은 해설자 믿을 수 있거든. 나는 다 안다. 이런 연도에 이런 일 일어나. 근데 어떨 때 그 믿을 수 없는 해설자도 있을 수도 있잖아. 그래서 이 영화는 그런 모티프랑 그러니까 중간에 이런 말도 했어. 그 인간들이 엄청 복잡하면서도 엄청 단순해. 이 이순신도 엄청 복잡한 얘기 막 있지만 그래도 그냥 스태츄야.
맞아.
가운데 있고.
맞아.
그래서 그러니까 우리도 우리를 좀 못 믿는, 우리의 기억을 못 믿는 어떤 영화 만들었는데 그거에 대한 어떤 코멘트나 이런.
근데 모든 일이 약간 되게 반복적으로 벌어진다라는 게 우리가 기억을 못하기 때문만은 아니고 되게 무의식적으로 어떤 걸 기억하고 있을 수도 있는 거잖아. 그래서 그것들이 내가 전에 했던 말인지 아닌지 헷갈림에도 불구하고 친구에게 또 이순신에 대해서 얘기한다거나 혹은 너 그때 일기 썼었잖아 라는 식으로 기억을 한다거나 그건 맞을 때도 있고 틀릴 때도 있었지만 그렇게 불확실한 기억들을 서로 같이 나누다 보면은 어떤 순간 그 순간마저도 기억이 되겠지? 그렇게 약간 쌓이는 눈 같은 거야. 어느 순간에 다 사라져 버릴지라도 쌓였던 순간은 존재하는 거니까 너무 은유적이긴 하지만 약간 그 눈은 다 어디로 가버렸지? 하는데 쌓였던 거잖아. 다 내가 그 눈을 밟았던 거고 그건 다 실제 했던 거니까 그 기억은 약간 그런 거라고 생각을 하고 그럼에도 불구하고 눈을 만졌던 차가운 감촉이 남아있듯이 영화 안에서 우리가 같은 실수를 반복하고 같은 얘기를 계속 하더라도 그 모든 것들이 무의미한 게 아니라 우리를 조금씩은 어딘가로 나아가게 한다는 거지. 조금씩은 변하는 거고 조금씩은 성장한다는 얘기를 결국에는 하는 거라고 생각을 해. 그리고 내가 봤을 때 일반 우리 사람들 모두가 다 그렇지만은 않겠지만 일상적으로 변화하는 일들은 이렇게 작은 대화 안에서 쌓여서 우리가 인지하지 못하는 사이에 내가 변해 있는 거지. 어느 순간 여기까지 해볼 수 있을 것 같아. 그런 이야기를 영화로 하고 싶었던 것 같고 꼭 그 얘기만은 아니겠지만 지금 캐롤린이 물어본 거는 그렇게 대답해 볼 수 있을 것 같아.
So yeah, to continue on this theme of like memory, honesty, fallible memory. He wants to bring up the point. This isn't necessarily his answer to his film, but just like vibing with you. This is kind of what one of the angles that he feels like he can express his opinion on. So like. The repetition, like the constant conversations or repeating things and forgetting what we repeat. It's not just from like a lack of remembering or we're not even really conscious of it. It's just sometimes we forget whether we said it or we forget when we did this or that, and it just comes up from somewhere inside of us, right, from our subconscious, and we talk about these things over and over again, and across 4 years, many different versions of that. So. And we don't always remember what we said when we say it. And it's almost like, he used the metaphor of like tracks in the snow.
Yeah.
So you might have walked here once, but the snow is always coming back and covering him up. And you forget it, frankly. You forget what you covered. And so this film can also kind of perhaps leave someone with a cold feeling, like snow, right? Like, so what's changed? Where's the development? Where's the growth? But for him, he wants to say that even if we do say the same things or there appears to be no growth, it is different each time. And in these kind of like there's small changes along the way that are almost imperceptible because there's just like in everyday life. And he kind of wanted to point out that outside of movies, just in our everyday lives, we forget what we say, we forget the conversations that we have, but it's really in those and in the repetitions of those kind of scenes and relationships and things that we've done over and over that we change, incrementally over time.
No, I I relate to that from a very personal level. Like I have multiple sclerosis, which is a neurological condition, and one of my symptoms of that is cognitive impairment, which affects my memory and affects my perception of time and memory. And my sister, my twin sister, and I were always having arguments about if I said a thing or if she said a thing, and she's always trying to tell me, you didn't say something, but I know I did.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the same thing where you're like you have to kind of almost battle within yourself that can I trust my own memory, my own perception of my own thoughts, you know, and like using the analogy of I love that analogy of footsteps in snow, is that the tracks are still there, but as snow falls over, like the indent becomes more shallow and more shallow, so like they're not visible, but you know the tracks are still there because you walk them.
Yeah.
And it's like, just because you can't see them doesn't mean that the footsteps aren't there. So memory is like that, you know, and memory can change and grow over time, and even the way we feel about our own memories changes over time. So I completely relate to that, and I think that's one of the things that really interests me about the film, because I do have a lot of conversations that repeat, and it's, you know, people would say it's like deja vu, but it's like you'll be like, but didn't we have this conversation like a while ago? And then you'll be like, but wait, I'm sure we had this conversation. And that happens, and that's kind of like outside of the film, that happens a lot in reality, where we're not sure if what we say sometimes is really true, or if the way we remember the conversations was actually real. So I relate to that a lot. I think which is why I'm so attracted to the film, because I'm like, this is how my brain works. And I'll be like, yeah, I've had this conversation like 100 times, but but it's still fun to have the same conversation over and over sometimes, because sometimes you'll get a new revelation from it each time.
Yeah.
Life is like that. Predictable and unpredictable at the same time.
Yes.
되게 이해했어.
And you mentioned, and the thing, and it's kind of funny, but like I think our whole conversation is revolving around the sense of honesty and perception and memory. And you mentioned that after TIFF and having experienced all of these film festivals and experiencing the film with audiences, that you want to, when you're writing a script in the future, you want to keep that idea of, I guess, an international sense of the storytelling through your films. And I think it's interesting that you say that, because to me, being here in Seoul, especially after seeing the film, I think to me you give a very honest perception of Seoul. And I remember I had told you before in our first interview that I had never seen Seoul shown that way on screen before. And when I said that, I meant it was in a very intimate sense, and like, you made locations like the dark alleyways feel like intimate spaces rather than a space of fear or of contention or conflict. You know, it's just like, this is just a space existing. And having been here in Seoul, I get that sense now. I'm like, I feel like you were very honest in storytelling and in how you depicted Seoul. So I think it's interesting that you say you want to keep audiences' perception of your stories in your films. And I'm kind of like, in my head when you were saying that, I was like, well, you kind of already do. Because you translate it for, you know, you keep Seoul, you keep the perception of Seoul honest, so that anyone that comes here now, they can say, this is really what Seoul feels like. And it does feel like that, you know, it does feel like a lived-in space. It does feel like a space where people can just like have regular, mundane conversations.
한번 할게. Just looking for a word.
Oh, it's okay, it's okay.
지금까지 이렇게 나눴던 이야기 중에 반복적으로 이렇게 솔직함, 뭐 어떤 시야, perception, 기억 뭐 이렇게 반복되는데, 아까 얘기했던 것 중에 이제 TIFF 토론토 갔다 와서 이제 앞으로 어떤 그 관객 조금 더 생각해서 한국이 있든 해외에 있든 이제 생각해서 쓸 거라고 했는데, 자기한테 이제 솔로, 이제 저번에 토론토에서 만났지만 솔로 이번에 와서 이제 그 자기가 만들었던 영화가 얼마나 그 서울이라는 도시 잘 표현했는지, 솔직하게 이렇게 담았는지 느낄 수 있었다. 저번에도 얘기했는데 이 서울의 각 공간들이 뭐 예를 들면 어떤 골목, 어떤 밤 거리 이렇게 무섭거나 저기에 어떤 싸움이 일어날 것 같은 이런 거 아니고, 그냥 직접 와보니까 그런 서울이네. 그러니까 친밀한 어떤 이런 분위기가 서울한테 좀 있는 것 같고, 공간마다 그런 것 이제 실제 자기가 와서 느껴보니까 자기가 이 소울에 대한 이야기, 그거 관련 스토리텔링, 이제 뭐 소울이라는 곳을 잘 정확하게 번역 이렇게 전달했다고 하는 거예요.
이해했습니다. 네. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. So, in when you were making this film, is there anything about Seoul, the city, as a character? Because the city is a character within this film. Is there anything throughout the 4 years of filming that you discovered about the city that you didn't know before? And again, that using honesty as a metaphor, are perceptions that you, like maybe your own misperceptions about the city when during filming you were saying, you know what, I didn't know this about my own city, you know, like I didn't know this is something that I will learn during filming.
자, 이제 서울 어떤 캐릭터로서 생각하면 4년 동안 찍으면서 어떤 새로운 배움, 서울에 대한 새로운 배움, 아니면 이제 찍기 전에 이렇게 생각했는데 어떤 오해 있었던지 어떤 새로운 배움, 이 도시에 대해서.
도시에 대해서 배웠다, 영화를 찍으면서 배운 건 굉장히 빨리 변하는 것 같아도 변하지 않는 부분이 있다. 근데 그건 영화 안에서도 캐릭터들이 많이 얘기하는 건데, 내가 이 영화를 찍고 더 크게 느낀 건 이제 영화제를 다니면서, 해외 영화제를 다니면서 느낀 건데, 많은 도시들이 서울이랑 비슷한 것 같아. 그거를 느꼈다는 가장 크게 느낀. 토론토도 그렇고 되게 역사적인 도시라고 생각하는데, 그 도시 역시도 최근 내가 토론토 영화제 갔을 때 굉장히 많이 공사를 하고 있고 바뀌고 있고, 그다음에 왜 바뀌고 있는지에 대한 뭐 경제적인 이유들에 대해서 현지에 있는, 거기에 살고 있는 사람들에게도 얘기를 자연스럽게 듣게 됐는데, 그런 모습들이 전 세계가 다 비슷하지 않나? 많은 도시들이 비슷하지 않나? 라는 생각을 하게 됐습니다. 그게 이 영화를 찍고 가장 크게 느낀 점이 될 수 있을 것 같아.
I mean, one thing that he learned about Seoul that also comes out through the characters, the conversations in the movie, is that it changes so fast, but it doesn't change at all. And I mean, we can talk about that, but he also wanted to point out, like, what he really learned was, the second thing was that other cities are also like Seoul. Like, having gone to Toronto, he realized he never went abroad before this, so this is really like opening up his world. He's been to Switzerland, he's been to Japan. So, going to these film festivals, other cities are like Seoul in similar ways. Like Toronto had its own story, its own history. It's also full of construction and change. It's happening. Yeah. And he had the chance to ask a local person, like, what are the economic factors behind this change? And there was overlap there. So like, he had to think to himself that, wow, like this is everywhere. Seoul is like one city amongst many, and this is just a city story. He learned about all cities from filming this film about a city. So
no, it's true, because you mentioned the construction in Toronto. I call it the city of perpetual construction. It never ends. It never it never ends. If you were to go back to Toronto again next year, you will see the same areas are under construction. And but yeah, that you were saying, like, Seoul is Seoul, but it's also kind of like similar to a lot of cities. It's true, and I think that's very interesting about the world we live in. That you can go to different places, but it can feel very familiar, even if you've never been before. Like before I came here to Seoul, I was in Busan, and where I was staying was Haeundae Beach, and I love Haeundae Beach because the topography is very different, but it reminds me of being in the Caribbean. It reminds me of being home in Barbados because I love the beach, but the feel, the vibe is very familiar. When I'm in Busan, I immediately feel comfortable. I immediately feel like I've been here before. Even the first Monday I had never been, I was like, oh, this feels comfortable. It feels the same. And like you're saying that you learned about other cities because you made this film, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about film, is that it helps us to learn more about the world that we live in, and like watching the film, it made me curious about the whole generally film, because Admiral because I watch a lot of Korean films and Korean dramas, and they've seen that statue in different films and things, but your film was the first time I had heard anyone talking about the whole right-handed, left-handed thing, and that's an interesting fact about the city. You know, a little something that will make people curious about if they ever come to Seoul. Like, let me go look at this statue and see if it's true. You know, and Toronto, but like you can be like, I'll go to Toronto and see if it's true about the construction. It is. Right? But I think that's the beauty about film. Like, film makes us curious, and like you said that Seoul changes, but it still sometimes stays the same, and that's very true. I think that's the same for everywhere you go, you know. And again, that's the kind of like what your characters do, you know. They change, but they kind of still stay the same, you know. And do you think that was something conscious you put into your film, or was that something you realized after filming, where you realized the whole idea of Seoul being the same but still changing over time, and your characters are like basically your characters are Seoul. Seoul is your characters, and your characters are Seoul.
마지막 질문만 해주면
마지막 질문만
다
위에 다 이해했고 흥연대 뭐 저거 오케이. 그러면 아까 얘기했던 이제 서울은 똑같은데 변화한다. 자기 그 영화 속에 있는 캐릭터들이 이제 똑같은데 좀 이렇게 작은 변화 있다. 그게 의도적으로 넣었던 요소인지.
의도적으로 그렇게 했지. 그렇게 해서 영화를 우리가 영화에서 뚜렷한 사건이 없잖아. 커다란 사고도 없고, 그렇기 때문에 그 영화 안에서 벌어지는 작은 변화들을 다양하게 표현을 해서 중첩을 시켜 놓으면은 사람들이 그걸 더 느낄 수 있을 거라고 생각했어. 그래서 의도적으로 이순신 동상이라든지 배경에 공사하고 있는 빌딩이라든지 지나다니는 사람들이라든지 이런 것들은 의도적으로 담으려고 노력을 했던 게 맞고, 그것들이 대화 역시도 다이얼로그 역시도 그렇게 배치를 했던 게 맞아.
It's completely intentional. One of the most important features of the film. You know, this Mimang doesn't have any huge conflicts, or no one gets killed. There's no huge crazy scenes, right?
I was just gonna say no one dies, and then I had to wait. Okay, but yeah, someone does.
So, that's what he did. He intentionally used these, this motif of like it's the same but it's different over and over through the small moments, through the sites that they visit, the same parts of the street, the dialogue, the same thing. Of course, the Isun-shin, dialogue about the statue to build the drama up. By slowly seeing these places over and over.
And Mark, you're not going to get away from this, because I actually want to ask you a question tied into this, because as someone you mentioned, you moved here 17 years ago.
Yeah.
So that was probably a few years before you moved to Toronto. For you, like, how has your perception of Seoul changed over the years, especially now after being involved with like the process of making this film, which is about Seoul changing, but yet still not changing?
여기 와서 대답해.
He's like, everyone, this is Mark.
Interpreter / translator of the film.
Yeah, the thought occurred to me to ask you, because like being immigrants, is because we're both immigrants, like our perception of our new homes changes a lot over time, because when you move to a city, you go where you want by day, and then the lived experience is vastly different to the perception you had before moving.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why this film was like a personal, why it's so important to me, even the first time I saw it, or even when I've seen it like hundreds of times, right? It was hard to translate. I've seen it like a lot, probably more than any other movie that I watched, and it still gets me. And like in a really weird scene in the third part, when they're driving back from the funeral, back from the countryside in a taxi, going around Seoul, they pass by like 6 of the neighborhoods that I've lived in.
Okay.
I've been kicked out of every neighborhood. I moved 10 times through this kind of construction. The city's always changing, and it passed by. They look completely different. All the neighborhoods. I've been here for 17 years, and everything has changed. But I know where that is, and that still has like this this feeling for me. And I know what it feels like to come back to Seoul and like feel like, okay, I'm home now from a long drive, from a camping trip, wherever you're going. So, I mean, I came here quite young when I was 18 and I moved here by myself.
You're a baby.
I was a baby. I became an adult here, you know. So there were so many different periods of my life, and the city, everything about it has changed. But there are certain scenes in this film when I feel like, okay, this is still the Seoul that I know. This is still my home. And yeah, I got choked up it still gets me. And it's not even like a dialogue, there's no drama happening, it's just people driving in the subway. But it's something about the build-up of this whole story, and so it's very personal for me too. As an expat, as someone living abroad.
It is, and I relate a lot to what you're saying, because when I go home to sometimes I really, really miss being home. I really miss the Caribbean, I miss the island. Like something I tell people all the time, and people don't really understand what I mean. Like, Barbados is an island. It's only 166 square miles. We're one of the smallest islands in the Caribbean. There's islands off the coast of Seoul that is bigger than Barbados, right?
Right.
But like we're completely surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean. So something that I didn't know I would miss is this ocean in regards to like seeing it, right? And like where I live in Scarborough, I live in a 17-story building, and I've been living in Scarborough the entire time I lived in Canada. And something that I still can't get used to is when I wake up and I look outside my 17-story building, is seeing land.
Just landlocked.
And sometimes that's like a physical yearning to see the ocean, because I'm just like, I miss home. But then when I go home to visit, at 2 weeks, I'm like, you know what? I'm kind of also ready to go back to Toronto. And it's kind of like, it's weird, and it's not something that I would ever expect, like once I go home, to like want to return to Toronto, because the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize about being not just an immigrant but moving away from the place you grew up is missing it, but then also building a connection with your new home, you know? Like that's something you have to kind of like accept. It's a thing in your brain, you have to say, this is my new home. And like then when you're like, you miss where you grew up, you miss your homeland, you miss, like for you miss Joello, but then you've made a home in Seoul, you know? You're making a film about Seoul, and showing that love for the city, but then it's like, how you're conflicted about wanting to be here, you know? But you still miss home, but it's like a conflict. And so like, that's one of the things I love talking about to filmmakers and to people like you who are involved in making films, like these kind of stories, is like, film to me is a universal language. And like, again, like I had never been to Seoul, but I saw parts, so I recognized some of the things that the characters were saying. You know, I can relate to your, like, even the way you made the film about perception and all of that. And then no, you were not talking about the film made you miss parts of where you used to live, you know, and things like you were gonna mention gentrification. And gentrification is something that's happening in Toronto now. And like, it's happening in Barbados too. And like, these kind of things are universal themes, you know. There's something that we're all experiencing to some degree. So that's why that's why I love what I do, to be able to tell people, film is a universal medium of sharing stories, a universal medium of sharing experiences. And like for you, like your film may be about Seoul, it may be about Korea, but like someone like me from the Caribbean, along living in North America, can relate a lot to what you're saying about your home and your connection to your home and your emotions, about your complicated emotions about a complicated city. I think Seoul is a very complicated city, but it's also very simple. So yeah.
Totally. I always question, like, I wonder if somebody from Seoul could make this film, you know? And
I don't think so.
I don't think so. And that's one of the things that I like about it.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you have to be from somewhere else to really see the finer details of the place.
Yeah, and that's what I think too. I think that's something you do very well in that from being outside of Seoul, you're able to look at it from a more honest perspective. Again, the theme of honesty, like you're not looking at it through rose-tinted glasses, as we would say, you know. You're showing it as it is. So that's what I said when I came here. I'm like, this is exactly, you showed it so exactly the way it is. Like for one thing, like your cinematography, this film is very interesting, where there's no it's not glossy. The film isn't glossy, you know. It's very matter of fact. It's very straightforward. Like the clothing is regular clothing. The lighting is regular lighting. We see, like when you're filming, you can see people across the street looking and saying, "What is going on in that film? What's going on over there?" And that's like not manufactured, you know. It feels very honest. So that's what I think. That's why one of the reasons I really wanted to speak to a second time is because there's not many films I've seen about Seoul that look and feel as real as Seoul is. I think.
약간 서울 뭐 화상 이렇게 그러니까 화장을 해서 이렇게 보여주는 거 아니고 되게 솔직하고 그냥 진짜 서울 그대로 이렇게 보여줬다는 게 진짜 옷부터 주변에 있는 지나가는 어떤 일반 사람들이 그것 되게 자기가 봤던 한국 영화 중에 서울에 대한 영화 중에 너무 솔직하게 표현했다. 저번도 얘기했지만 또 다시 강조하는 거예요.
Yeah. So we're gonna. I think we'll be talking, but we're gonna wrap up now. But in ending, I do want to talk about the look and feel of the film. So we talked about the themes, the script, and showing Seoul. So one of the most important aspects of that is the sound editing, the sound design, and the cinematography.
Yeah.
Again, there's not like a big score. Like I think a lot of the sound of this film is very natural. You hear the construction, you hear people in the backgrounds having discussions, you know, you hear the horns from the cars honking. So the soundtrack of Seoul is Seoul, you know, and the cinematography again is very, I noticed for a lot of the scenes, it focuses mainly a lot on the characters and like the background is kind of like fuzzy and like almost like me with my terrible eyesight. Because I'm wearing contacts right now, but it's kind of like that's how you see a city, you know, like you focus really what's behind on in front of you, and then like everything else is kind of like easy. So talk about showing that part, that honesty of Seoul through the sound design and the cinematography.
내가 한번
얘기하기 전에 좀 디테일한 그런 것들만 정리해주세요.
일단 뭐 지금까지 아는 얘기 나눴는데 지금부터 그런 이렇게 영화에 생긴 거 그리고 느낌 전달하는 느낌에 대해서 얘기하자면 크게 사운드 디자인이랑 시네마토그래피에 대해서 얘기하고 싶은데 사운드 디자인 봤을 때 약간 되게 자연스럽게 삐삐 소리 나오고 공사 소리 있으면 그러니까 그 배경 자체가 이 음악도 있지만 이제 그냥 일반적인 어떤 소리들 그 소음의 소리들 들어갔다고 자기가 보는 거고 그 다음에 그 시네마토그래피 측에서 이제 실제 도시 경험하는 것처럼 자기가 이제 원래 안경 쓰시는 지금 컨텍스트지만 그러니까 원래 흐지부지처럼 나와요. 그러니까 자기 앞에 있는 어떤 인물, 뭐 같이 대화하고 있는 상대, 뭐 이 정도 약간 걸어가고 있는 같이 하는 친구에 대한 어떤 집중 있으면 그 배경은 그냥 도시인 거지. 그래서 자기가 그렇게 느꼈는데 그러니까 전달하고자 하는 느낌이랑 특히 뭐 사운드 디자인, 시네마토그래피 쪽에 측에서 좀 코멘트 있어요.
사운드부터 얘기를 하자면 실제로 영화를 찍을 때는 목소리 위주로 이제 사운드를 땄다고 해야 되나? 부르는 그러니까 실제로는 대사 위주로 사운드를 많이 녹음을 했어. 그런데 후반 작업에서 실제로 이제 화면 안에 지나가는 차가 있으면 차 사운드를 넣었고 배경에 공사를 하고 있으면 공사장 소리를 원래대로라면 지워야 되거나 아니면 작게만 넣어야 되는데 그걸 조금 더 키웠고 그리고 실제로 화면 안에서는 공사하고 있지 않더라도 계속 어디선가 이렇게 도시에서 공사하고 있는 소리를 일부러 더 집어넣었고 이런 생활에서 나올 수 있는 백색 소음이라고 해야 될까? 우리가 인지하고 있지 않지만 계속 들리는 소음들이 있잖아. 그런 소음들을 일부러 디자인해서 사운드 팀이랑 같이 만들었어 전부 다. 그게 굉장히 자연스럽게 들렸다면은 사운드 팀이 너무 기뻐할 것 같고 그 부분을 굉장히 신경을 많이 썼어. 여기까지 사운드에 대해서.
First, with regard to the sound design, like the way they originally were going to do it was just it's based off of the conversation. So they were focusing first on the script. But as the characters were talking, you know, maybe a car passed by, and they would keep that. Even, you know, most films would maybe take that out, you know, to kind of avoid confusion or muddling the sound, but they would put that in, maybe even turn up the volume a little bit louder than it was to give like more of a city sound. And like, you know, they even spent a lot of time adding extra construction sounds into the film, like a white noise, to just give you like that complete feeling like you're immersed in the city.
그리고 이제 촬영에 대해서는 망원 렌즈를 썼는데 망원 렌즈가 와이드 렌즈는 와이드하게 잡으려고 했지만 이제 롱 테이크를 위해서 망원 렌즈가 정확하게 텔레스코프 렌즈가 아마 맞을 거야. 그 렌즈를 사용했던 이유는 이제 영화 안에서의 대사, 그림을 그리는 규칙과 같은 건데 한 번 이제 선을 그을 때 가장 길게 쓸 것이라는 대사가 있어. 그림에 4가지 규칙이 있잖아. 그 규칙처럼 촬영을 접근했다고요. 이게 첫 번째 이유고, 현실적인 이유는 이제 그 현장에서 실제 로케이션에서 모든 것들을 다 통제해가면서 샷을 다 하나하나씩 일반적인 영화처럼 따지 않았던 건 그 현장을 있는 그대로 담아야 되기 때문에 그 망원 렌즈, 텔레스코프 렌즈를 사용했던 것이고, 두 번째가 그 다음에 인물의 동선을 잘 보다 보면은 영화 안에서 이제 첫 번째 파트에서 여자가 이렇게 달팽이를 형상화하거나 세 번째 파트에서 미로를 여자가 이렇게 걷는 장면이 나오잖아, 절에서. 그 동선과 카메라의 위치들을 맞춰서 촬영을 했다라고 얘기할 수 있어. 그래서 카메라의 위치나 그다음에 카메라 렌즈 선택이나 인물들이 오고 가는 동선들이 결국에는 다 이제 촬영 감독과 함께 맞춰서 대화를 해나가면서 만들었던 거야. 이제 촬영을 그렇게 했기 때문에 편집도 그렇게 자연스럽게 영향을 받아서 편집까지 이루어졌던 거야.
그 부분 다시 한번 들을 수 있을까? 그 버스 안에서 이렇게 그리면서 그리고 그 미러 이렇게 따라해서 그게 어떻게 이 촬영이랑 연결되는 거지?
처음에 인물이 첫 번째 파트에서는 카메라가 멀리서 지켜보는데 인물들이 걸어가는 걸 보면 좌에서 우로 움직이는 게 많아. 그래서 두 번째 파트부터는 이렇게 카메라가 앞뒤로 이제 인물들이 앞으로 뒤로, 처음에 여자도 들어오면서 시작하거든. 이제 평면 이게 수평으로 움직이는 게 아니라 수직으로 움직이는 거지. 깊이 있게. 그다음에 세 번째에서는 이제 카메라가 위에서 내려다보기도 하고 아래에서 올려다보기도 하고 이렇게 입체감이 생기게 되고, 가장 큰 변화는 이제 어느 순간부터 카메라가 인물을 따라가기 시작해. 그런 식으로 약간 미로를 돌고 도는 느낌으로 촬영을 했던 거야.
Okay. First of all, they used a telescope lens from the film. And the reason for that is kind of hinted at in the first segment when the male character talks about like he's learning how to draw and there are 4 rules, and one of the rules was to draw a long line, long unwavering line without stopping, right?
Yeah. That's why I should like that style. Yes.
So there were a lot of long takes as well. Like instead of filming each scene and stopping everything, you know, the city was just going on as it happened. And so they were filming, and you know, you have these like nice long takes of just really, you know, people walking through the city and shooting the scenes. And you know, he talked a lot with the video director, and they worked on kind of how they're going to film each segment together through a lot of conversation. And this is then also, it kind of like naturally was reflected in the editing because they had such a clear vision about how the cinematography should be filmed. And so, you know, in the first episode, it's a lot of left to right, people moving from left to right. In the second one, it's a lot of back and forth. In the third one, you have up and down shots. And so he was mentioning that this kind of, you know, this movement, almost like moving through a maze, right? So in the third one, she's going through, it's a Buddhist like prayer maze. Or, you know, she uses the sign, like a kind of snail sign that she's writing on the window, representing like the movement of the time of the clock. So that's kind of, what he has to say about the cinematography.
And there's a scene close to the end that kind of like encapsulates all of that. This is the scene where they're in the Tiny Rain Cafe. And the sound editing is interesting because some you do very interesting. I was actually very surprised, but again, I caught it in the second viewing, where the proprietress of the cafe, the owner, she's behind the counter and she coughs.
She coughs.
She coughs, and it's, to me it seemed very natural. Like this is something the actors just cough, and you kept that in. So because like normally a filmmaker would have been like, cut, let's edit that out, reshoot the scene. But you're like, no, I'm gonna keep it. It's the same thing as if a car passes, but you keep the scene, right? And that was very natural, and that's like there was no need to edit because it doesn't interrupt the flow of the story. It just feels very realistic. And you mentioned the cinematography in that scene is like what you were saying, because I noticed it was interesting you kept this camera focused on the female lead character for most of that conversation. And you only switch it around closer to the end of their conversation and then you focus it on the male lead. So that's again where you like, that's where you mentioned at the beginning where the film starts out from a distance and you bring the audience and the camera closer to the character. So like what you were saying about the sound design and the cinematography all coalesce in that one particular sequence, and that's, I really like that sequence because again, like you do things that I think a lot of filmmakers wouldn't do, which is like keep the coffin and keep the camera focused on this female character as she's going through this dialogue and this discussion, and then like you mentioned the snail thing, and I can kind of see the pattern because it moves from focusing on her to switching around and coming back around to face him. So that's an interesting way to film.
I got it.
You got it?
Again, we're wrap up here, but thank you so much, Taeyang, for talking to me. And this was a great discussion. I'm so happy that I was able to speak to you here in Seoul, but also in as close to where you work, because this is the area that you work in. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and share with me like your filmmaking journey as well as this film, because for a first feature film, you've done a spectacular job, I think. So we feel very, very proud of you and your team and everyone who worked on the film.
감사합니다.
감사합니다.
Thank you for inviting me.
No, thank you. And thank you, Mark, for your interpreting and for being in this hot seat for a bit.
Of course. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yay, thank you. So I'm gonna cut it.